Hello everyone, welcome to the new video of our series, Virtualization with Hyper-V. In this video, we are going to talk about the networking in Hyper-V. So we are going to learn about the networking basics that are used in Hyper-V environment. And we will learn how we can create virtual switches and how we configure virtual networks in Hyper-V environment. So let's get started. So first, we need to understand Virtual Switch Manager. Virtual Switch Manager is the utility that is used to create new virtual switches in Hyper-V or to be able to remove these switches from the Hyper-V environment. There are three types of switches that are available in Hyper-V: external, internal, and private. So we are going to learn about all three virtual switches, and we will learn how we can create these switches. So if I show you the Virtual Switch Manager, let's go to our Hyper-V Manager console. And on the right hand side you will see Virtual Switch Manager. So once you click on this will come up with this wizard which shows us the Virtual Switch Manager console. Now in here, as you can see, in here we have got the option of create virtual switch. So we have got external, internal, and private switches in Hyper-V, and depending on your requirement you create the type of switch. And we are going to understand the working of all three virtual switches to identify that how these three are different from each other. Now let's talk about virtual switch types. As we just mentioned, we have three kind of switches in Hyper-V environment: private switch, internal switch, and external switch. In the first image, we have shown the scenario of an external switch. So let's understand how exactly it works when we create an external switch. So whenever we create an external switch, a management OS virtual adapter gets created on a physical host. We can see it in control panel in network and sharing center. And whenever we create virtual machines, we have the virtual adapters connected to those machines. And when we create a external switch or any virtual switch, we need to connect our virtual machines to that virtual switch for them to be able to communicate in that network. So in this scenario, we have all these virtual machines adapter connected to our external switch, and we have our management OS virtual adapter on this. So this adapter can communicate with all these virtual machine virtual adapters. And then we have a physical adapter connected to this Hyper-V virtual switch, to the external switch. And then this physical adapter is connected to our physical switch in our LAN environment so that it can communicate to the external networks as well with the help of switch and then routers connected to our environment. So that shows us that whenever we create an external switch in Hyper-V environment, our virtual machines will be able to communicate with the Hyper-V host with the help of this management OS virtual adapter, and they will also be able to communicate to the external networks with the help of this physical adapter. So we'll have to map one of our physical adapters to this external switch whenever we create one external switch so that our virtual machines can connect to external networks. And this external switch is mostly used in all of the organizations for the production environment, so that all of their servers, whether it's a Linux or Windows server, doesn't matter, because it depends on the guest operating system that we install on our virtual machines. And then those servers would be able to connect to all of the external networks as well as between the virtual machines as well. So next, we have internal switch. Now, in this image, the difference that we have is that we do not have a physical adapter mapped onto this internal switch. We do have a management OS virtual adapter because whenever we create an internal switch, we also get a management OS virtual adapter, which allows us to communicate with the virtual adapters of our virtual machines. So whenever we create one internal virtual switch, all of our virtual machines will be able to communicate with each other as well as they will be able to communicate with our Hyper-V host as well. In the external switch, our virtual machines were able to communicate with within each other as well as with the Hyper-V host and to the external networks. But in internal switch, our virtual machines can communicate with each other as well as with the Hyper-V host only. They cannot communicate further than that. They cannot go to any external network. to be able to communicate with any external network or to be able to access internet on all these internal switches or on all the virtual machines that are connected with internal switch, we have to enable the NATing for that. Next we have is private virtual switch. In this image, we can see that we have got this Hyper-V virtual switch created, but there is no management OS virtual adapter created in this scenario. What does that mean? It means that our virtual machines can only communicate within each other. They cannot communicate with a Hyper-V host as well. In both other scenarios, in case of external and internal, our Hyper-V virtual machines were able to communicate with each other as well as to the Hyper-V host. But in case of private switch, only the virtual machines can communicate with each other. They cannot communicate with the Hyper-V host. So that's why mostly the private switch is used when we need an isolated network where we don't want our virtual machines to be able to communicate with any other network or to our Hyper-V host. So that's how the private, internal, and external switches work in Hyper-V. I have shown the private switch, internal switch, and external switch differences in the slides here. So we can go through those. So the communication happens only within the virtual machines in case of private switch, and virtual machines cannot communicate with the Hyper-V host. And this is used to create the isolated networks. Then we have an internal switch. The communication happens within the virtual machine as well as with the Hyper-V host, as we just saw in our second scenario, or the and yes, it was the second scenario. And then we have virtual machines cannot communicate with external networks. VMs cannot access internet with the internal switch. We can enable NAT in order to have VMs access to the internet. And there's one another thing which I would like to mention, that whenever we create a Hyper-V environment or when we install Hyper-V, we get a default switch with Hyper-V Manager. So whenever we open Hyper-V Manager and then go to Virtual Switch Manager, we'll have a default switch created in there. So that default switch is always of type internal switch. So, and there is netting enabled by default on that default switch. So all of our virtual machines will be able to connect to internet because it has NAT enabled on it. We can use a PowerShell command to enable the NAT on any of our virtual network, and then our virtual machines will be able to connect to internet even when we are using internal switch. So always remember, by default there is a default switch created in Hyper-V Manager, and that is of type internal switch. And if we create a manual internal switch, that internal switch will not have access to internet to all the virtual machines. We will have to enable NAT for that. Next we have is external switch. The communication happens within the virtual machine, Hyper-V host, and with the external networks. And all of our VMs can access internet by default. If we have a Hyper-V host only one NIC, then the management operating system need to share the physical adapter with external switch. I'll show this in our practical that how exactly it works. The next one is, if Hyper-V host has more than one network interface cards, then management OS do not have to share the adapter. So let's see what exactly this means in case of external switches. So let's open our Hyper-V Manager and we go to Virtual Switch Manager. Now in here, we have this external switch, and if we click on create virtual switch, this will create our external switch. We'll just have to give the name of the switch. So we can type external switch 3. All right, if we need to type any description about this switch, we can type it in here. The next option we have is connection type. So in here we need to select external network because we are going to create an external switch in this scenario. And if we select internal, then it will create an internal switch. If we select private, then it will create a private switch. Now one thing to note here, that only in case of external network we have this drop down available. We do not have it in available for internal and private. Why? Because only our external network allows, or only our external virtual switch allows us to be able to connect to external networks. So for that purpose, we'll have to map our external switch to one of our physical network interface cards. So right now, I only have one network interface card on my machine. So that's why I only have one Ethernet connection available in here and one for the wireless, right? So if I'll have more than one network interface cards, physical adapters, then I'll have more number of Ethernet connections in this list. So what we need to do is we need to select that which physical adapter we are going to map with our external virtual switch, so that our external virtual switch can access that network or can connect to that network. So let's say that I connect to Ethernet connection, but do note that we have right now we have connected to our Wi-Fi. So that's why even if we select Ethernet connection, it will not allow us to communicate anywhere because our physical host do not have any connectivity with that Ethernet connection. So if we select wireless, then only our virtual machines will be able to communicate with external networks or to internet. Now there is another option that we have is allow management operating system to share this network adapter. Now this option only applies when we only have one network interface card on our Hyper-V host. In my case, it will apply because on this machine, I only have one physical network adapter. So if I check this box, then my one and only physical network interface card will be mapped to this external switch. And the connectivity will be shared between my management OS, which is my physical host, and between external network switch. So if I check this box, then the connectivity will be disconnected for a few seconds and then it will reestablish because our physical adapter will be mapped to the external virtual switch. And if I have more than one physical adapters on my computer, then what I can do is I can simply just select that adapter in here in this drop down, and I don't have to share the connectivity of my management operating system with my external switch because I have a dedicated physical uh, adapter for my external switch. If I don't have a dedicated one, then I'll have to share my management operating system connectivity with my external switch. So that's the difference. So depending on the scenario that you have, if you have multiple adapters, you can just simply select a dedicated uh, physical adapter here and then just uncheck this box. If you have a single NIC on your computer, then you'll have to select that Ethernet adapter and then check this box. If you do not check this box in case of in case of a single NIC, then your machines will not be able to connect to internet or will not be able to access the external networks. So that's how it works in external switch. So check one more thing here. So if we go to network and sharing center, you can simply just type ncpa.cpl in the run box and hit OK, and it will open your network connections. So I have already created several virtual switches. So it's showing all the virtual adapters for all those virtual switches. So you can see this is the default switch that gets created when we create a Hyper-V manager. Let me show it in the switch manager as well. So this is the default switch that we have. And you can see that by default it is of internal type and we cannot change it. And it also uses the DHCP. When we use a default switch, it has its own DHCP configuration, which is of 172 range, that it provides the IP address to all the virtual machines. We don't have to set up a different DHCP server if we use a default switch, but mostly we do not use a default switch in our production environments, but we can do it for the test and lab environments, etc. So always remember it will have its own DHCP and it will assign the IP addresses to the virtual machines dynamically. Another option that we have here is VLAN ID. So we can use this option if you want to put our virtual machines in any VLAN network. And this is only available in case of internal network and external networks. We cannot use a VLAN for the private networks. Why? Because we all know that our virtual machines cannot communicate to a Hyper-V host and to any external network. So that's why We cannot use VLAN in case of private network, but you can put your virtual machines and uh, uh, all your servers in a VLAN if you are using an internal network or external network. Now let's take a look at the network connections that we have. So let's go to network connections. We can simply just open runbox and type ncpa.cpl to be able to open any network connection. And we can also go to control panel, network and sharing center, and then change adapter settings. You can also open it from there. So let's hit OK. Now, in here, you will see that there are several virtual adapters created in here. Why? Because we have several virtual switches created in Virtual Switch Manager. So whenever you create an internal switch and external switch, you will have a virtual adapter created in your network connections. We will not have a virtual adapter for private switch. Always remember that. So let's maximize it. Now, whenever you create a virtual switch, either it's an internal switch or an external switch, you will have to configure its network or IP address settings. So let's first go to this V internal switch one. So whenever we create an internal switch, we'll come here, we'll go to properties, and then you will need to assign an IP address to it. You will need to define that which network range it will be part of. So right now I have assigned it the IP address 20.1. So that means all of my virtual machines will follow the same range, and depending on the subnet mask, those number of addresses you can use. So if I connect any virtual machine to this virtual internal switch, all those will be uh, will be assigned the IP address of this 20.0 range. If I assign the IP address of a different range, then those will not be able to communicate with each other. So make sure that you are assigning the IP address to your virtual machines of the same range that your virtual network adapter has. You can also use the first option, which is obtain an IP address automatically. You will use this option if you have a DHCP server in your environment. So even if you are using internal network or a external switch, you will need to choose this option if you're using a DHCP server in your environment. But if you do not have a DHCP, make sure you use the static option. I'll cancel this because I do not have a DHCP server for this internal switch. So that's why we'll just go ahead and cancel this. Now, if we talk about the external switch, so let's go to the adapter we have for external. Now, we can see that we have the green leaf written in here. Why? Because we have mapped a physical adapter to this external switch. So because right now my computer is connected to Wi-Fi and it's using its Wi-Fi adapter, so we have mapped that adapter to our external switch, and our management OS adapter is sharing its connectivity with this external switch. So that's how that checkbox that we saw in Virtual Switch Manager. Let me show that to you once again. So I'm talking about this option, allow management operating system to share this network adapter. So because I only have one adapter, either it's Wi-Fi or either it's Ethernet. So depending on that, your external virtual adapter will show the network name in here, and it will use the network configuration settings from your Wi-Fi, from your router that you have at your home. If you are connecting this external switch to your Wi-Fi, then it will definitely use the router at your home. If you are using an Ethernet connection to your computer, and if that Ethernet is connected to the same router, then it will use the same settings as well. So you do not have to do the settings manually in here because you are sharing the connectivity with your physical adapter. So that's why we have the obtain an IP address automatically option selected in here. But if you are not connecting this to a router which has the DHCP enabled or which is acting as a DHCP, then you will have to do the configuration manually and make sure that you are using the configuration or the network range uh, accordingly, so that your external network or your other devices in the same LAN network can communicate with each other. So that's how this network connectivity work in Hyper-V Manager. All right, thank you everyone for joining in. Let's wrap up today's video here, and I hope you were able to understand the basics and the concepts behind virtual networks in Hyper-V. In our next video, we are going to create a lab of all these virtual switches. We are going to see how internal, external, and private virtual switches work in the lab, and we are going to see all those practicals. So let's wrap up for today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye bye.